right, hey guys, today I am with Matt Sperling. Thank you so much for coaching me today. I was just telling chat that yesterday I went 4-2 in the SCG, so I didn't get the free MCQ qualifier, but that's okay because I have you to help me.
Yeah, well, happy to do it. Thanks for helping me. Also, I'm sort of trying to get more reps with coaching, so I'm learning as I go. I had to use my own matches earlier this week in a coaching session. Identified a bunch of mistakes that I made in matches, and that was fun and also sort of a good way to dive in. But it'll be great to have someone else's matches I haven't seen before. So thank you for sharing these matches and these games rather. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, so this match is Teamer Adventures versus Sultai Ultimatum. I'll just pass it over to you, and hopefully you don't cringe. Okay?
No. Like I said, all good. And I almost never, if ever, play a match where I don't make a bunch of mistakes. So I think that's magic. It's everybody's doing that. So the goal is not to sort of pick how many mistakes can we spot. The goal is, can we identify some patterns, some things that are some tips, some sort of helpful shortcuts, I would describe them as. So I'll talk about mulliganing first, some of the shortcuts I like. But before we get there, in terms of like what you're looking to get out of a coaching session potentially, do you have a short list of things that hey, I know I need to work on X, Y, Z, or I'd like to focus on this or that? Anything that comes to mind when I ask that question?
Not really in specific. I just want to be a better Magic player. I think one thing for me is that sometimes I have trouble identifying where I actually want to spend my time on improving, because everyone can relate in the chat. Sometimes you have life, work, etc., and not much time to devote to Magic. So I think that maybe if you notice anything maybe I'm doing all the time and that I can improve on, that'd be great. Because we want to be effective with our time.
That makes a lot of sense. And let me say, diving in and just playing and streaming, I think it is a really good way of spending time playing Magic and playing competitively in an event, right? So I think that's the most important thing. You wouldn't want to skip that. Now, if you can add on to that some time like we're going to do, where you go back and watch, where you sort of think about, that game felt really close. Maybe I could have played this run differently or done that differently. Having those moments, I think, is helpful to sort of be able to zoom out. I know streaming you have a lot going on. It's easy to lose focus even when you're not streaming. When you are, it's even more easy to lose focus. So hopefully this is helpful in doing that, and I'll try to provide some of the tools to make that most efficient use of your time if you do go back and look at a game. So I think we'll start with this mulligan decision, and we'll talk about sort of different ways of zooming in on different moments in time and help spot the important moments, and then help talk through different strategy pieces. So starting with this hand, sometimes in these tournaments you don't know what your opponent's playing. Here your opponent has revealed Yorion, so you have an idea. Obviously they're probably playing this ultimatum deck. So how do you talk me through thinking about this hand and whether this feels like a keep, a mulligan, and what are the key pieces there, just so I can hear your thought process and maybe provide some feedback.
Okay, so with this hand, I believe I do mulligan. In my mind, Teamer Adventures, Sultai Ultimatum has a bigger edge on mid-range decks, so I'm never going to win the late game. So what I'm trying to find are pieces. Edgewall Innkeeper would be nice, but I really want pressure pieces such as, the Bone Crusher Giant is a 4/3, or like a Lovestruck Beast for attacks, because I never want them to make the end game. Now the Mystical Dispute is nice, but with this hand I mulligan it. I don't have anything pressure wise or anything to enable this henge.
And so we'll watch that decision. But while I do, I think that's spot on. I think that there are a couple of things that I really, really like in your description. First of all, there's an awareness of what the opponent's playing and sort of so it's matchup specific. It's not just like, hey, my deck generally likes to have X, Y, Z. You're thinking about the actual matchup. That's great. And I totally agree that the hands that aren't able to pressure the opponent are pretty risky. And you also have, so the only thing I would add to that, which I think all that is correct, and you got to the right place, and you don't need more than that. But I think one thing I would add in general, I like to think about, for hands that are missing something. And you mentioned here that you're missing sort of something that pressures the opponent. I think that's absolutely right. You're also missing a third land. That there's a risk that the third land doesn't show up. But really importantly, you need more than one thing to improve this hand. You're going to need a third land and one of those pressuring 3-drops, right? So maybe Raising Bar will do it. Maybe obviously Bone Crusher is great, but those alone won't be enough because you also need a third land. And many, many, many hands that need more than one thing to improve are a mulligan. So if this hand had a third land, you might still mulligan it because, again, pressure is so important. But when you need a third land and something to pressure, it becomes a pretty clear mulligan. So I just want to sort of fold that sort of into the analysis as well.
I don't think that they have a lot of...
So that's spot on, and we'll see what the 6 brings. The opponent's mulligan, you do want to, the opponent's mulligan, it could potentially impact what we're doing, but it actually is not going to make us more inclined to keep a hand that's sort of missing pieces because we don't want to be stumbling around while our opponent might be. We want to actually have some pressure, so it almost makes it even more important. All right, so now let's look at this next one.
So yeah, I'll mulligan this one. It would have been nice, like if I had a red land or a green land or red and green instead of this. I would have kept, and maybe I would have just drawn the third land. But yeah, this has got to be a mulligan to 5. Like it's too risky.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't need to spend a ton of time on this, but I think with a mountain, with specifically mountain, I think we can keep. I think we have sort of not a perfect 6, but again, if you think about, use that little shortcut, right? We're only missing that 1/3 land. That's all we're really missing to really be out of the gate with Stomp, Bone Crusher. And although that's not ideal, we have some late game. Maybe Innkeeper can come in depending on what the third land is. So that's enough. And then without it, I mean, there's just not enough here.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get to talk about 3 different hands of mulliganing at least.
Yeah.
So, opponent kept 6.
Yeah, and then this one, it's what I'm working with. I think with this hand, I just send back the Goldspan Dragons because, the Mammoth's nice to pressure. If I get my third land, I have that Fabled Passage to attack with, and then the Lovestruck Beast is you got the 1/1 token and the 5/5. So that is what I'm thinking to close out the game with a multiplier.
First thing, I like that you sort of kept it really quickly. I think there's not, you don't benefit from dragging every decision out. And, I think it's good to conserve mental, it's clear you're going to keep this on 5, right? So you kept it right away. I like that. I just want to say, I like that you're sort of understanding where to slow down and where not. I think a big part of improving at Magic is actually knowing when to slow down. We get into sometimes these patterns where we're playing too fast and we're breezing past, or we're slowing down too much and we're sort of stuck. And I like that you're sort of spending time where you need it and not. As for what to put on the bottom, it's interesting. I think I would probably keep 1 dragon and 2 land and a mammoth. And the reason is on the draw with 5 cards, the mammoth does this really nice thing where, and it's not by a lot, right? I think bottoming both dragons is also fine. But the mammoth does this nice thing where it sort of flexes. If you're putting the dragon on the bottom, you're sort of saying, okay, I want my mammoth to be a spell, but you already have a 3-drop, so I might want to keep a dragon, 2 lands. Then if I draw a land, I will play a land. If I draw a spell, I'll play the mammoth as a land, and I like that flexibility sometimes. Just something to think about, something to play with. I don't think it's a big difference. It might not even be better, but I would my first instinct was to probably keep 1 dragon, but it's close, very close.
Okay.
Just specifically those sort of the spell land, it can be nice to have sort of 2 lands and a spell land. When you're so tight on land, you're sort of almost guaranteeing that you're going to have that flexibility to choose whether, here you have a risk of flooding if more lands come. You don't have that 5-drop, and you have 2 5-drops on the bottom, but it's close.
Yeah.
Okay, so even though, one thing it might have been worth a moment's pause about sort of,
right,
do I want to play a different land turn 1 given that I drew another land, but ultimately I think that's the sort of shortcut of, I'm going to want to play these triumphs turn 1 and missing a 1/1 on turn 1, no big deal. I think it seems right as far as whether to slow down in those moments. One thing is you don't want to, the only note I would provide there really is that sometimes you pre-plan your turn 1 when you're on the draw. And you do want to stop for a split second to see what did I draw, does it change anything, especially if it's an untapped land in a hand like this. Here, there's not really anything. There's not a reason not to play it because you don't really have a 2-mana spell. But if there's a Bone Crusher in here, you might think about doing something differently.
Right.
So far so good. I'm with you on these decisions so far.
Right.
Yep.
In this one, I guess no. So the one decision was that I could have put Alrund's Epiphany into the Foretell zone, but I just want to probably play out this Lovestruck Beast as a turn 3 play, or even the Mammoth.
Yeah,
so
I think
why I just rushed that one.
No, that's right. That's right. I think playing onto the board is your sort of first priority, and and foretelling is definitely a lower priority. You'll probably find a turn at some point. I mean, it's not guaranteed, but the other thing is obviously like it lets you sort of play Lovestruck Beast turn 3 if you want to, or turn 4 if you draw like a Innkeeper, for example. It just, you want to have that moment out there. So I totally agree with that. Which side to play your pathways on becomes important in this deck. Obviously, like you've played it. Once you have Catcher or Try 'em Out, life gets easier. The games where you don't have Catcher or Try 'em Out, it becomes really important. So here you have sort of access to everything, right? You can sort of play your pathways on whichever side, and then get Fabled Passage, can get that. You'll sort of have it all here, I think.
Right.
It's nice. You get to bluff a dispute by playing blue, but overall, I probably would just maybe put a second green in, knowing that Mammoth is a likely turn 3. But it's it's not really gonna matter. But just a note that with this deck, it becomes really like you got to sort of learn some of the shortcuts here. But one of them, thankfully, is when you have Catcher or Try 'em Out, life gets a lot easier. And I often find it easier with these triomes to think about less about what do I need and like what can go right, and I think more about like what can go wrong. And so I think that helps me more. Like if I think like, oh well, what are the situations where I might need 3 green and not have it? What are the situations where I might need 3 blue because of Brazen Borrower, Petty Theft, and not have it? So I tend to sort of think of like what are the extremes. Once I know I can satisfy my basic requirements, sort of think about that. So I think you want to potentially play on blue. Makes sense. Like you're just trying to think about like these corner cases, but so far you're going to be all good with Catcher or Try 'em and Fabled Passage.
Sure. So in that case, I played the Alrund's Epiphany, or sorry, blue because of Alrund's Epiphany. But so when does it become like you're thinking, okay, well I might need double red for Goldspan Dragon, this and that, instead of using your pathways because of what is in your hand?
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. So I think like in this playing Teamer, often like it is really dangerous to put yourself in spots where you don't have double red, or potentially double blue if Brazen Bar was a color that showed up or might show up. So I think like sometimes you have to just think about like prioritize your development first with the cards you have. Once you said, okay, I've got my double green, I can play my Candidate Mammoth. What's the next most important thing? You also want to think about like the order in which the mana is important. So the second blue mana doesn't tend to be important until later in the game.
Right.
Now, Brazen Borrower sometimes shows up as an exception, but here, like if that Fabled Passage was a land that doesn't make red, like I'd probably want to figure out a way to get red in with one of these other lands. But again, I think here you're fine because like Brazen Borrower is just as likely to show up as Dragon, and if the Dragon does show up, it'll be easy. By that point, you'll have Fabled Passage for a red, so you're fine here. I think this is an example. I was trying to sort of tee up some things for later, but here I think you're fine.
Yeah. I think it's helpful for chat because sometimes we're playing Naya, especially Naya, and people are like, oh, the mana's horrible, but it does consistently well, but it's because people who are piloting it really well just are very much aware of the land. So I think even for chat, it's really helpful.
Yeah. The lands can, and it comes with practice. I mean, I think the pathways really do reward having some practice with them. It's just tougher to play these than lands in the past. Like in the past, there were some mana bases where you just sort of like pick up the deck, and it's like it's shocks and check land. It's like, okay, well, I know how to put Blood Crypt into play or whatever. These are just very different.
Right.
So if you are just sort of coming back into standard or competitive constructed, spend some time with the pathways and sort of watch what good players do with them. And I'll just think about, oh, I got stuck that game with my mana. Why did that happen? And yeah, with Naya and Temur, it's really important.
Okay.
I like that you play the 3-drop on turn 3. That it has a chance to grow bigger. It's also, if you draw Innkeeper, Lovestruck Beast will be able to help you. Yeah, the Pelucanos is.
Yeah, this is.
Here.
Yeah, it gets a little tough.
Yeah, your resource light. I mean, there's nothing you can do. It's just on a Molda 5, the opponent hasn't done a whole lot yet, but removal spell Pelucanos is still pretty good when you're resource low, and then Molda 5 with 2 Epiphanies, you're really squeezed for things to do that are going to actually matter against Pelucanos. So this one's going to be tough. I think the fetch there, second blue. So in that spot, that we talked about. Well, I talked about how like you'll be able to fetch a red, and at that point you will have 2 of each. So that one was an example where you already have 2 blue, and even though theoretically you could like need to petty theft and Brazen Bar, that's fine. You can just spread those out in 2 different turns. So that mountain there would have been good. The thing that we talked about to get now you have 2 of everything. You're sort of locked in. So I think priority number 1 is be able to cast the things you have. Priority number 2 is get 2 of everything, so that no matter what you draw, you'll be able to do it. So if we had done that, then the second mountain I think would have been the pick.
Right.
So a note here. If the Pelucanos attacks, I guess the plan is just to block it. If there's removal, I'm just thinking about whether I think I would have held one of the 1/1s back just in the event of removal. I think I do want to block Pelucanos, make it a 5/5 and stay at 14. It's not, again, these aren't big equities, but it makes us more, just in terms of like thinking about what's going to be the highest impact use of these 1/1s. The 1 damage is not nothing, but I just think taking 6 here and keeping Pelucanos at a 6/6 is just slightly worse in the case of removal. Again, not these are like tiny edges, but just a small note.
And I think that then that means that they're using their mana on the Pelucanos and not like a high cost spell at the same time.
Yeah, if they were to like remove the blocker, it costs them mana. You still take less damage, so it's still. Yeah, so here's Heartless Act, and in this spot, the opponent would have. Again, it doesn't mean like we're going to be in a much better spot or anything. And in fact, we drew Brazen Bar, we're not even in a better spot. But overall, I'd rather be at 14 life and have my opponent have a 5/5 than have the 2 1/1s out. So just sort of like you have to sort of figure out how to make that trade off and try to envision both scenarios and think. And the removal and then attack scenario was likely enough that it was worth thinking about.
Yeah, here I'm just trying to just use my mana effectively, and yeah, I think I just go in with 1.
Okay.
Thinking about what am I gonna petty theft like the next turn. It's like, oh, I really want to hit my red, so the decision there is to either bounce the Pelucanos or just the Yorion so I can get an attack in. I mean, both don't feel great, but I feel like that's kind of what my options are.
Yeah, in this spot, you're sort of stuck between 2 options that both feel pretty bad, because if you just bounce the Pelucanos now and it comes back down, or the Yorion comes down, then your dragon is, dragon just, you can get maybe 1 attack in and then it'll get chomped. That still might be the best we can do. So, I mean, my instinct was bounce Pelucanos and just buy yourself time. Whereas if you say go and try to block, it's not bad. But then now if Yorion comes down, untaps Pelucanos, the opponent's still sort of 1 step ahead. Whereas if you bounce now, the opponent can only do 1 thing on their turn. So let's say they play Pelucanos again. Let's say they have another land that comes in tap, but they don't have another land. Then the dragon can hit.
Right.
If they attack if they like decide to use their Pelucanos to kill the dragon, okay, at least you have a treasure and and the Plukonos took 4, so now you can maybe get to 6 mana, start taking time walks. I think I probably would have pursued that line, and that's just, I think, a little bit understanding like how dire your situation is. You really are on the back foot, and just probably want to find the play that buys you the most time and sort of tries to play a little bit of a tempo game. It's just going to be pretty hard without having the opponent have like 2 big things out.
Right.
Huh. Okay, they're going max.
Yeah.
Opponent's going max value on their binding. All right, that's good.
And here, yeah.
Yeah, talk me through. Talk me through this.
Well, I'm in a tough spot, obviously, but here, like, it would be, to me, I'm just like, okay, bounce the Polakranos here to save myself the damage. Hopefully they just replay it, but I'm still in a tough spot because even if I do get my land for the Goldspan Dragon attack, then they just remove it with the Yorion, and then I'm banking on getting the wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, after that, like, it just doesn't look good. But it's basically, well, then I can take an Alrund's Epiphany and then try to see how to get out of it. But with that binding, it just makes things in a really tough spot in general. And then they even have the 3rd land for the
So we missed our fight. I think we missed. There was a window there. Now the opponent should have maybe played around it, but there's a window in response to binding. If we bounce, once we sort of know it, I think like it was clear at that point. We could just bounce it. Then it's going to cost us a 1/1, not that big a deal. Okay, so we could have bounced. I agree with bouncing it. I think that's right. I think we could have timed it slightly better. Fine. And then the last thing is that against thinking about sort of how Yorion and binding and Goldspan Dragon interact. Just keep in mind, you don't have to play the Goldspan Dragon. You can wait for the binding to have come and gone. Now opponent does have Plukonos, so it's again, it's sort of you're between a rock and a hard place, so it may not work either way. But just in general, oftentimes against this deck, once they put Yorion into their hand, here we don't have the choice, fine. But once they put Yorion in their hand, you can sort of do nothing for a turn cycle if you need to sort of not let them binding you, and that's often better than letting the binding happen. Here it doesn't matter. We don't have anything going on.
Yeah, so this is tough. Like,
there's not much to be done from here.
Yeah, I'm just gonna play the Brazen Borer, but it's still tough because, like, I think here I'm just like, I hope you fight my Brazen Borer, basically. Because then that means the Poly K gets smaller and there's less of a clock on me, but...
Yep. No, that's exactly right.
If... Like, my opponent's gonna be, like, a good player, so they're likely not, because I'm just like, I hope you fight, but then they're gonna fight my Goldspan Dragon before it
it's a really good thought process. It's a really good thought process, and specifically what's really good about it is when you're this far behind, you can't always play around your opponent's best line. Your best chance to win this game might be playing Brazen Borrower, hoping that your opponent feels some kind of sense of urgency and fights it. Then you get to like dragon into dragon and sort of get something going there. Maybe it involves drawing another petty theft to bounce something. Fine, like that may be your best chance, right? So I think like that's exactly the right mode of thinking. Is like, well, this Brazen Borrower doesn't look great, but it's better than not playing it, and maybe my opponent will make a mistake. Like that all sounds right.
So I did draw the land, and I hope I just play the Goldspan Dragon attack.
Well, let's think about that. So, Goldspan Dragon attack sort of makes the turn. It makes the Goldspan Dragon is going to die before it gets to attack for sure. It gets us 3 damage, but it gives our opponent. It doesn't give our opponent the chance to make a mistake, meaning like fight the Brazen Borrower. So actually here, it's probably better to just attack with Brazen Borrower. If the opponent takes it, you're in the same spot. Okay, fine. No difference. They're still going to fight Plukonos. They're against the Goldspan Dragon, like same result. If they choose to fight Brazen Borrower, you get to play Goldspan Dragon. Yes, they have Yorion and they can end step fight. Yes, like it's still bad, but it's a little better, right? So I think maybe attack first, give my opponent a chance to make a mistake. You're probably gonna end up in the same spot, but again, it's the same thing as last turn. So give your opponent a chance to use the Plukonos. This just gives them maybe one more chance.
Yeah, I think I'm literally thinking about that right now.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense only because there's no chance you get to attack with Goldspan Dragon, right? Because the opponent has no reason to, like, they're gonna see it. I mean, unless there's like they don't have a stop. So it looks like you found that play.
Yeah,
Great, perfect.
I did. Okay, never mind.
Awesome, yeah. And opponent took it. So like opponent did their thing. Okay, Obosh. So now, yeah, I think that's fine. I mean.
Yeah, I think
Dragon.
I mean, I could have bluffed a counter, like, but at this point, I'm just like, I think at this point, my opponent's so far ahead that they wouldn't even really.
Yeah, no, I think bluffing a counter. Yeah, bluffing a counter, I think is out of the question. I think it's just a question of like post-combat Goldspan Dragon, take 4 counters off Plukonos, and I think your play's fine because the opponent's gonna have a chance to reset Plukonos using the Yorion. So yeah, that's fine. Put Obosh in hand. Try yes a couple time walks over there in exile. Seems reasonable to me.
And then they just had the epiphany, but that's fine.
Yep. All right.
Okay. Let's see.
Sideboarding. I don't know if you're working off a plan or sort of just going in general.
No, I think that I identify that I just need to win through pressure. So I'm thinking about Vivian, and I'm just like, nah. And then I'm thinking about maybe just removing all the Great Henges in general, just so I could get the pressure on. And I don't want, since they have so much removal, like instant speed removal, board wipes, the Great Henge, I'm afraid it's just gonna get stuck in hand, even if I have 1 or 2. So I'm just going for creatures. Hopefully I can get a couple Alrun's Epiphanies off. So that's kind of my sideboard plan.
I like it. It's like you said earlier, you're not likely to win a game that takes a million turns, and so having cards like the Great Henge that are sort of late game value, it's fine to have 1 in your deck. It's sort of, you still sort of stay scary a little bit, but it's also I usually take them out. That sounds fine to me, and I like it shows an understanding of the matchup again, where you are already going to match up. You have counters and threats, and if your opponent doesn't have removal, you're already going to be matching up pretty well. And so why not let's just use counters as a way to sort of defend those threats, as opposed to using Great Henge to then turn like a threat into even more. I agree. The game doesn't need to go that way. So I like that.
Right. What do you think about Klothys in general against Sultai? I feel like as the meta goes and they get more and more cards, I feel that like Klothys is such a weak turn 3 play at times, because likely they're ramping up so much that the damage you're getting off of Klothys is like so negligible, and I'd rather develop like a 3-drop on that turn. And then playing it on a later turn is just kind of like, well, whatever.
Yeah, we found it to be pretty good. It's one of those. It's one of those things where the theory for why it's good is a little bit harder to explain than just like playing and realizing, it actually helps you sort of put a threat out there that doesn't get swept away. It's just a good card against sweepers in particular.
Okay.
And it pressures them. It's not a good turn 3 play, but that's okay. The reason, so I think like the shortcut I would use there is that, or the mode of thought. Yes, it's not a great turn 3 play, but you're not going to cut any of your better turn 3 plays to put it in your deck. And so for that reason, it doesn't really matter that it's not as good as like Lovestruck Beast or even Brazen Borrower on turn 3, because you're not going to cut those cards to put it in. So it's okay. Those cards can still do their thing on turn 3. If you draw them, great. You'll be able to cast them. At least Klothys gives you a backup plan for turn 3, and it also gives you that turn 4, turn 5 play to put more pressure onto the board in a way that doesn't walk into a sweeper. It doesn't overextend you into Shadow's Verdict in particular, right?
Okay.
So it's good. It sort of helps you diversify. And so that's why it sort of plays out better. But in general, it's not a card that I would look at and think like, this card is going to be great against Ultimatum. It just happens, as we've played this matchup a bunch, and it seems like, okay, it does enough to sort of make you resilient in the longer game. And so even though it's not a turn 3 play, that's fine.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, and getting back to this game, it's a clear keep. You have three of Electric Beast, that important three drop. You have the counter spell that we talked about to back up the pressure. So you play. I call these game plans sort of like Delver game plans, meaning you're just going to put some relatively cheap threat out there, and then use a few counter spells with key timing to disrupt what your opponent's doing. Perfect keep, natural, sort of plays into that strategy. As far as between Kanzandu Mammoth and Lovestruck Beast here, probably the same thing we saw last game, right? Once you know you have enough lands, you can probably play the Mammoth first. What are your thoughts?
I think I end up just playing the Lovestruck Beast here. I think because I think my reasoning to play the Lovestruck Beast was that if they remove that, they'll remove it anyways, and then perhaps I need the Kazandu Mammoth land for something. But I think that you make a good point in that I didn't even really think about playing Kazandu Mammoth as a creature. I just kind of had it. Yeah, I had it in my head that I was just gonna play the Lovestruck Beast. If they remove it, and that's fine. And I would rather have them remove it, thinking that I would still keep like Kenjin or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's close. I mean, it's not. It doesn't make a big difference. I think it's close. I think, obviously in general, all else equal, the Mammoth is sort of better earlier because it's sort of really threatening when you still have all these cards in your hand to make these land drops. It's also more likely you have Fable passage, so the opponent's pretty encouraged to kill it. And then lastly, if you do draw Innkeeper one or more, right? I mean, the more Lovestruck Beasts you keep, the more dangerous those Innkeeper top decks are. So in general, Mammoth, but I would only say that once we're at the 4 and 5 land zone, we have 4 other lands. So we're not quite perfect with 5. So I think there's some merit to your play. I don't think it's not like a clear, it's certainly not like a bonehead play. I just think once I'm at 4 on turn 3 lands, okay, I'm probably comfortable playing the Mammoth.
Okay. I'm just like, oh, what if I just play the Mammoth? Sometimes I don't remember what I did, so.
Yeah, no, I found the same thing watching my games earlier this week, where I was like, oh yeah, I should obviously just play the crab here or whatever, and then I do something different. Oh, I guess I didn't realize that. One subtle thing that was nice about your play, though, it is possible the opponent decides to kill the 1/1, and you're so flush on 1/1s that would actually be a pretty big, boon to what you're trying to do. Like that would be really nice if the opponent were to somehow decide, well, I'll just go for the 1/1. No, they didn't, but I like that your play at least offered them that opportunity, which you could then punish by playing more and more Heart's Desires.
Mm-hmm. So here I'm thinking, do I just want to play Beast in a token, or I could put the Alrun's Epiphany into the Foretell Zone and then just play out the 2 1/1s. That's kind of where I'm at right now, and I think I just go with the
I like your play. I like your play. No, I like your play. It's maximum pressure. You don't have another land to feed that Mammoth, so that Mammoth actually might now go, based on the line we pursued, which is fine. I think now the Mammoth might be a land if we draw a spell, especially with that, because now we have an Epiphany. We don't have a land to feed the Mammoth. I think your play is perfect. It puts the most pressure out there. It's pretty resilient. It's relatively resilient against, extinction events, because you've got some tokens that'll survive. Yeah, it looks right.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to hold up dispute yet. Obviously, like thinking about that play, it's pressure first, and then once I have the pressure, I'm going to use counter spells to disrupt those strong plays. But before you got to deploy the pressure first. So clearly, we're not going to hold dispute up. I like that you didn't consider that. That's absolutely right. Instead, we just dropped the Lovestruck Beast out there, spot on. I think your viewers are hopefully picking up on some of the things that you're naturally doing in terms of talking through the matchup and saying, hey, I want to get my pressure out there. It's really important that I have one of my 3 drops out that's attacking my. Look at the opponent's life total, how quickly it falls when I have a 3 drop out, versus when you don't. That attack for 1, attack for 2 doesn't do it. So if you're new to the deck and you're watching this, definitely pick up on that. I think you're doing a great job with that, keeping that pressure up. And here, now we're in the spot. Now we're in the phase of the game where we do have to think about keeping Mystical Dispute up, because we have the pressure out already, and the opponent is now getting up there in mana. So what are you thinking about this turn, or what, how are you planning on playing this turn?
So I was just thinking about, like you said, am I gonna need this dispute? Like, Shadow's Verdict is a play that can be played next turn, and then I'm just thinking, okay, well, do I want to dispute that? When do I put the Alrund's Epiphany into the foretell zone? That's kind of what I'm thinking. If they play the Shadow's Verdict, I'm thinking about, okay, do I dispute that? I mean, it's not exactly lethal, but then they would just need another sweeper. I think that them not playing like an extinction event last turn, to me, in my head, I'm just like, they likely don't have a sweeper, or because in my mind that they would be a little afraid of this Lovestruck Beast pressure. I don't remember what I did.
Yeah. So yes. Okay. I mean, I think that's fair. I think we want to think about whether we have enough pressure to where the opponent is really going to have to do something, and so the answer is yes and no. Yes, the opponent's going to have to do something, but no, they're not going to like die right away. We don't have a 1-turn clock. So like playing a Lovestruck Beast, for example, would put a 1-turn clock out there. But I look at that and I think, okay, what are the chances my opponent, kept this hand, they've developed their mana, and now when they hit the 6th land, they're just going to like fold up and die to a couple creatures. Like, not all that high.
Okay.
Instead, this might be the right opportunity actually to foretell that Epiphany, play a land, say go, have the dispute. The opponent plays a sweeper. I'm fine disputing it, attacking, and then if I draw a land, I have lethal with that Alrund's Epiphany. If I don't, I can just play what I drew or keep the pressure on, whatever. It's probably, in my mind, I've got enough pressure. It's probably time to lean back on the dispute. If you want to deploy another threat, it's fine. We have plenty of threats. Like, the opponent does sweep, we can just play another Mammoth or whatever. Like, that's fine. But I think I'd probably want to stay disruptive here with 7 power out.
Mm. See what I do.
I think either way you're gonna probably foretell, and it's just a question of whether you want another threat or whether you want to have dispute. So let's see how it plays out. Yep.
Yeah, I think I just do that in dispute.
Yep.
Okay,
All right.
I'm just like, okay, Callous Blood Mage, I guess. I don't even dispute that. It's not really a big deal.
Yeah. The opponent,
and them drawing a card there, to me, it seems like they just don't have an answer to my board state at this time.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't like. So this is a quick note. So like, okay. I agree. You're gonna play the Valley, but playing it pre-combat is giving away some free information. So
okay.
There's just a little note on sequencing, because you want to basically you don't have a landfall creature out. So let's go ahead and get into combat. That way, the opponent has to play a little bit scared, because let's say they have in their hand, I don't know, you can imagine them having like a negate or whatever, and a removal spell. Well, if you have this card over here in exile, and you have your 5 mana plus your land drop still, they have to play a little bit more timidly potentially because of that threat. So playing the Valley removes that threat. So just a small note there, just a little sequencing thing.
Right, because in the foretell zone, I already had Alrund's Epiphany, so they could have reacted by playing a removal on Lovestruck Beast or something, and then I would have enough mana to just fire off the Alrund's Epiphany.
You would have the threat, right? You don't have to have the 6th land, but you would be threatening it. So right. Then it makes them less able to like use removal, the spell that costs 2 or 3 mana. Now again, this is small stuff, but that's what I'm here to point out. Things that you maybe don't pick up in the middle of the game. Now we're watching again. Great, we'll pick up on them. All right, so here it's just a chump block. No surprises. The opponent just goes ahead and cycles with weird timing also. Okay. So now let's talk about. Okay, so here I see. Well, let's just get past the foretell. If that's what's going on. Okay, so there's something subtle here with this play, where the opponent's at 8. So. Yeah, they're going to die to the Epiphany, but I think like the first Epiphany you cast is already going to be pretty good.
Yeah.
I would probably Heart's Desire here in order to put lethal on the board, because 7 is a lot different than 8 when they're on 8. And that way, if I dispute something, if they just like ultimatum and I dispute it, I mean, I guess they're dead anyway, so that's fine. It's a pretty minor thing. I'm not even, now that I mention it, now that you do have the 6th land, you have Epiphany, yeah. it's pretty marginal, but I would at least give some consideration.
No, I think I talked about that on stream. I was like, oh, I'm 1 point off, and I already have 2 Epiphanies in hand. So I think that going back, I would have definitely played that Heart's Desire. But yeah.
Yeah, well, it's all good. This worked out.
Yeah, a lot of different ways to win. Pretty
Yeah.
good.
I mean,
Awesome.
I think you should probably play Stomp because it doesn't get disputed, but the opponent pretty clearly didn't have dispute there, given that zero dispute resolved, so it's sort of moot.
Okay, and here I think,
I
I don't know about this play draw mystical dispute. I like to do 3 on the play, 4 on the draw kind of situation.
Yeah, I'd probably just have them all in. Their deck's slow enough, but so whatever. That's sort of neither here nor there. I really like that you're thinking about play draw as different configurations and different sort of roles you might be playing. Where on the play you're oftentimes doing something slightly different. The fact that you're thinking about that is a big win. Whether you want 3 or 4 dispute, who cares? I mean, that sounds reasonable. Like maybe you do, maybe you don't. I probably would want 4. I often will trim a card like Epiphany. Even though, not everyone agrees with that. Some people like to have all their Epiphanies in. For me, it's like, well, it's sort of only good when you already have pressure, and I already feel good in those games. I'd rather, if I just have a dispute, it's going to be a little bit more flexible, and I probably win that game anyways if I have pressure and dispute versus pressure and time walk. So I'm okay trimming one of those. But again, these are the small things that you can sort out in preparation. Over the board, thinking about sort of what the play dynamics that matter, I really like that you were thinking about the difference between play and draw. Mm-hmm. All right, so talk me through. Now you're on the draw. Right. Talk me through this hand.
Okay, so this hand, I'm like, oh, it kind of sucks because it's not the nuts, but I think I do end up keeping this, just hoping that I can get my blue lands. It's pretty okay. It's reactive, but it's okay on the draw. And I'm thinking that I could probably just draw better to improve this hand. So I do end up keeping it.
I like that. Let me quickly talk through what I recommend to players as sort of the progression and thinking sort of systematically through mulligans. You're actually thinking about mulligans in already a pretty advanced way. So this is not to take you off of that, but just to apply some structure. And this is especially helpful for players who are watching who may be a little bit less experienced. I like to say, okay, let's start with are there sort of inherent risks in the hand, sort of red flags, I call it. Meaning, do I have only 2 lands or 1 land, or do I have 5 lands and I'm really at danger of flooding? So here, there's no red flags that pop out, and then I progress into sort of key cards, key interactions, how the first few turns going to play out. So we think about how the first few turns going to play out. Is it on game plan? The most important thing with this deck is having one of those 3-mana pressure cards. You have that. And that's also as we step into key cards, key interactions, you have sort of something disruptive here. You have something that pressures. So you sort of have the pieces. So I think stepping through all those, you're good. You sort of checked all those boxes. And lastly, let's talk, like I mentioned before, how many different things do I need to improve this hand? How easy is it to improve the hand versus hard? Here, I think this hand is pretty easy to improve. Lands are sort of helpful because you only have 3 and you get a little more, and spells are helpful because they may be more pressure or more disruption. So I think the hand's pretty easy to improve. So for players who are new to mulligan decisions or sort of struggle with it, if you step through that sort of red flags, early development, key cards, and then sort of how hard or how easy is it to improve, that I think will help players sort through that. Now, you actually got there really quickly, which I liked, and you're good. I mean, you're going to keep it, and it's all good, but that'll help some of the players who maybe are newer to it.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of awkwardness on the lands in the sense that you have 2 that, potentially come to tap, but there's a lot of ways to solve that. You can just sort of bite the bullet and on turn 2, or you can draw a land, and then you're all good. We're playing mono blue tempo this game. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's the draw you get.
Right. Okay, so I drew a mountain here, and I think this turn... Okay, so I guess the decision here, I could have played the Fabled Passage to get the blue, but I think I just end up disrupting the ramp.
Yeah, I like this play. I mean, you'll be able to get the blue on turn 4 untapped with Fabled Passage, so if you have to deploy the Brazen Borrower as a threat a little bit later, fine, you can. You still have access to that. It just won't be turn 3. That's fine. But you get to make this play of petty theft, the opponent's Will-O-Wisp Haven, and sort of take away that tempo advantage. And playing on the draw against that 2-mana ramp spell is pretty dangerous. I really like your play. I like that you played the mountain. You want to play the basic land first that preserve your optionality on the pathway, right? So now you can do what you need to do with that pathway later. Maybe it's going to be red, maybe it's going to be green, probably green, but just in general, sort of a quick shortcut for people. You want to play those basics before the pathways, keep your optionality. So I really like that turn. And even though you don't have 2 blue, you didn't panic and sort of play the Fabled Passage to make sure you can Brazen Borrower. So you know what? I can even petty theft twice if I have to. Keep that Wolf Haven off the board, and then Brazen Borrowers are not far behind. They'll be here eventually. Yeah, these are some of the hands you fear. Nice. Okay, so blue showed up.
Yeah.
Some of the hands you fear, when the opponent has like the turn 2 ramp, turn 3 ramp. Yeah, but hey, we're fighting back. We played the petty theft. At least the opponent's not going to be right up to 6. So doing what we can to hang in the game. Island was a nice draw because now we have again that optionality. We can be disruptive if we need to, or we can just start to get our threats out. Mm-hmm. Yep. Wolf Haven, sure, on the tap land. Okay, great. Yeah, perfect. So opponent decided to, or not decided, maybe they didn't have anything going. So now just this gives us an opportunity to get that pressure out. Now we can really play a Delver game. We have a 3-power flyer. We have a bunch of blue counters. Now we're playing Delver. Let's go. I don't know how much experience you have playing like older formats like Legacy and stuff.
I actually started in War of the Spark, so I have no idea what Delver is.
Well,
so yeah, for sure, man. That's the kind of game.
Boomers, for boomers like me, Delver, that reference makes sense. For some of the viewers, that may make sense. It just means the same thing we've been talking about. Put that cheap threat out there, get that pressure going, and then the counter spells will keep your opponent from spending 4 or 5 mana to get back in the game because you're going to stop that spell for 2-3 mana. Mm-hmm. And so you play that tempo game and play that game where their life total just gets chipped away. 20 becomes 17, 14. Second borrower comes out. Oops, now it's 14 becomes 8. And that's how we chip away. And those counters become really scary for an opponent who's trying to catch up using 6, 7 mana spells sometimes in this ultimatum deck. So that's the general plan. Like, look at this sweeper. I mean, so obviously 2 ways to play. We can stop the sweeper, or we can just redeploy. Which do you think is a stronger option?
I was just like, oh, okay. Shadow's Verdict, sure. I don't remember what I did this turn, but I definitely just let the Shadow's Verdict pass. I don't remember if I redeployed my Brazen Borrower though.
Okay.
But I was very confused to why the opponent decided to Shadow's Verdict. Here, let's see what I do. I think chat was pretty confused too.
So, again, okay.
I think, what do you think about, I think I end up cycling this for a different draw. I think
that's not my preference. I think not counting Shadow's Verdict is fine. Like, don't panic. Like, it's just a 1-for-1. That it's all good, right? Even though sometimes in other games it's really important to counter Shadow's Verdict, this isn't one of those games. But I do think getting that pressure out is going to be in general stronger when you have this many because you just have so many counters in your hand, right? Your opponent might even be playing like with Dispute themselves. Fine, like you can dispute back because you now have 3 blue. Put that 3-1 out. It's just going to give you pressure so that the opponent, like let's say the opponent has like Elder Gargaroth, Pelucanos, Yorion, like eventually something is going to stick potentially, but if you have something out that's attacking, so every time you counter that Gargaroth next turn, just as an example, they can have a million cards, but let's imagine it's Gargaroth. When you counter that Gargaroth, they took 3 on your turn, and they take another 3 right after you counter the Gargaroth. Those really add up. So with no pressure on the board, I would definitely look to get that pressure down and make those counter spells a little bit scarier.
Yeah, and I think that... So now, I think that not playing the Brazen Borrower this turn cost me, because now like you said, my hand is so full of counters. This turn I could have attacked with Brazen Borrower, saw it coming to the foretell zone, and then have Mystical Dispute up. So I think I lost tempo there.
No, I mean, you did gain a cycle, so I mean, there's something gained. Like, it's not like you did nothing. I mean, untapping and not using your mana would have been an even more sort of indefensible position. But I mean, cycling is doing something, so that's good. Like, you're still biasing towards action and being active. But I just think like the pressure is just the more important action. So I would just take that. But it's fine.
So now the opponent. The opponent was holding up one blue island. If they had disputed or tried to dispute the Brazen Borrower, I could have cracked the passage to get an island and then dispute back. Is that something you would have considered?
Yeah. Again, and I would have, because the Mystical Dispute is not like a precious resource. You have another dispute, you have a saw coming. At that point, you had one saw coming, 2 disputes. So I think if the opponent is saying, hey, I care enough to use my dispute, I'm going to go ahead and say, yep, me too. I care enough I'll use one of my 2 disputes.
Okay.
And so I think that's fine. It's sort of like tit for tat there, where the opponent's going to use their dispute, you're going to use yours. And if it's your last dispute, you have to think hard about what you really want to do it. But you have no pressure and multiple disputes, so definitely the pressure would be the more scarce resource. I would preserve the 3-1 and go for it there. Here you have some decisions around Foretell.
I thought I did the Epiphany. I thought that foretelling one of the Saw It Comings would have been not as big of a difference. And
no, I think exactly right.
Yeah, if I didn't hit my 7th land, I would have just fired off Alrund's Epiphany, especially if they tapped out this turn.
Yep, and you have Saw It Coming, Mystical Dispute already, so the Saw It Comings are already sort of efficient enough. I mean, eventually it'd be nice to get one into, it's not a priority, whereas the Alrund's Epiphany, if you want to cast it without the 7th mana, you're going to need it in Foretell. If you want to cast it with Dispute backup, if you do draw 7th mana, you're going to still need it in Foretell. So I think that's absolutely right. So I love that turn, understanding sort of which is the more important card to Foretell, and also thinking ahead a little bit to what happens if I don't draw my 7th land? What happens if I do draw my 7th land but I need to use Dispute? So I like that. And again, you just have this 3-1. You're going to try to sort of just ride this 3-1 to victory. And I think using the counter here, again, it's just sort of more of the same. You have a game plan here, and you're going to go ahead and follow it, right? There's no, like, letting the Yorion resolve. Now, again, all these plays your opponent has made to try to take you down to zero pressure. You said, nah, I want to keep this tempo going, keep this pressure on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that turn, so that's interesting. So going for the time walk, there's an indication that your opponent doesn't have a way to stop it because they didn't even fight over their Yorion. So I like that. I mean, I think
I think that's what I did. I was like, okay, if they're desperate enough to just play the Yorion and they didn't have a counter backup, they would have played it last turn. So I just fired off my Epiphany this turn.
Yeah, there's some danger that the opponent does have a counter. They're going to counter it and then untap and do something really scary. I mean, so like that's a risk. It's worth thinking about. Ultimately, if you decide, hey, based on the way this game is playing, it might even be based on the tempo of the timing of like when you counter, there wasn't even like a moment of thinking about countering back or anything like that. Like sometimes you can get a pretty good sense that your opponent doesn't have a counter spell. And if you want to follow that sort of instinct you have, but the opponent just doesn't have a counter here, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to Epiphany, try to slam the door. Like I'm with that. I think if you had no indication either way, it might not be great to tap out there and risk it. But here, you actually had a couple of turns where it sure looked like the opponent doesn't have a counter.
Right. And here I think I was like, oh, do I just slam this dragon kind of thing? It's not lethal. Should I be more patient? Because then that means I have Saw It Coming and Dispute.
Yeah.
I think I ended up slamming the dragon anyway, but that was something to consider because, Goldspan Dragon has haste. They would have to answer this board anyway, and I would have lethal at some point or another, so that was a consideration. I'm curious to know if you would have just kind of held back this turn.
So we know our opponent doesn't have a counter, so having 2 counters is not so critical. So the nice thing about playing it, we'll get the treasure, we'll get to attack, and then 9 damage. Our opponent's at 2. They basically have to find I mean, even Shadow's Verdict is no good because you have the dragon. It sounds pretty good to me. Obviously, the alternative is like play the Innkeeper, attack for 5, the opponent goes to 6. You still have lethal, plus you have the Goldspan Dragon. So, and now you can try to play with 2 counters with lethal. Overall, I think at this point you're far enough ahead that you can probably afford to play it safe. Like, let's say like the worst case scenario for to play the Innkeeper play is like they play Shadow's Verdict. Well, you have a counter. And in fact, you have a counter and then another counter if they were to draw a dispute or draw a negate. So I think like probably would play around my opponent drawing, let's say the card negate specifically is a good example of what could go wrong if we play dragon. We play dragon, we attack, they untap, they play ultimatum with the negate that they just drew. Sounds a little bit riskier, so I probably would just pressure, but again, it's close. We don't think they have the negate or dispute right now, because again, obviously we just resolved the time walk, so they don't. So it's close.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the nice thing about your line, you don't even care about Shadow's Verdict now, right? So you sort of like take cards out of the deck. You put like 2. You don't even care about necessarily Extinction Event. Given that your opponent is at 2 and you literally have 2, 2/1 power even players. So yeah. I think that both plays are fine. They're both like winning plays. It's just a question of which one sort of manages your risks better. Probably the Innkeeper, but it's close.
Right.
Overall, like the way you played the game. I think you sort of understood your role and made sure to sort of counter the things that mattered and not the things that didn't. Like you, for example, you didn't counter. So yeah, so it's scary, right? Now the opponent, well, what if they did draw a negate?
Exactly.
So obviously, like there's a little bit of the fear. Now, hopefully your opponent doesn't have it. But anyways, what I was saying was overall, I thought you did a good job to understand what the important cards were. You let the Shadow's Verdict resolve, but you didn't let the Yorion resolve. So even though both of them sort of were 1-for-1 answers. And the reason is you had a second Brazen Borrower when the opponent cast the first Shadow's Verdict. So you sort of had redundancy. You had another way to get that pressure on board. Whereas when they played Yorion, you didn't have anything else going on if they resolved that. So you went ahead and countered it. So I like the way you played this game. Well, hopefully this saw it coming resolves. Yep. And that should be it.
Yep. And that is it. Yeah, again, 4-2. Okay, so overall, any advice for chat or for me, just by looking at this match? Like, for I guess a more specific question is that if I kind of wanted to recreate this coaching session, but for myself, and not having like a coach, like a better player to look at my game, like what kinds of things can I do to improve my game and also just look at my VOD?
It's a great question. So one of the things that I've been again telling, like the two themes that keep coming out in the coaching sessions I'm having. One is about that mulligans progression. I think that's just a helpful tip. The other one is I like to use the element of surprise, use the concept of surprise as a way to figure out what to zoom in on. So what I mean by that is when you're watching your video back, try to think about, well, okay, why did I do that? I'm surprised by that. Stop the video, right? Think about why you did what you did and why now looking back it's surprising to you. Think about that turn earlier in one of the games where you drew the Goldspan Dragon and then we looked down at your lands and you only had 1 red, even though you could have had 2 red. That's a moment where there's like some surprise there, right? Where it's like, oh, well, clearly like I wasn't thinking about. So that's just a moment. So use that surprise. So when you're watching a video, find those sort of moments of dissonance between what you expect to see, what you expect yourself to do, and what you did, or the result. Hey, I'm looking at this game, I thought I was ahead on turn 5 as I'm staring at it. But I remember, I know I didn't win this game because it's game 3, I lost the match. So let me think about, like, from here, what went wrong. And then you can slow down there and think, and let me be careful every turn here and see sort of where I could have maybe made a decision. The other thing, just let me look at key decision points. So I think all that is going to come as you watch the thing. And the other thing about the element of surprise is, like, in the match when you're playing, if the opponent does something that's a little different than what you expected, think about what that reveals about their game plan. And that really helps. I think a lot of people leveling up from sort of competitive player to really strong player involves playing a little bit more from the opponent's side of the table. So sort of switching your viewpoint, saying, okay, from my opponent's viewpoint, what are they likely thinking about this game? Are they feeling pressured? Are they feeling Like no, it's all good. Are they comfortable? What are they going to be trying to do? How are they going to be trying to squeeze me on mana, on cards, whatever? So, anyways, to get into that, one easy way in is think about surprise. So I expect my opponent to play like a Lovestruck Beast on turn 3, but instead they play the 2/2 Llanowar Visionary that draws a card. I want to stop and think, okay, my opponent's telling me instead of playing Lovestruck Beast from exile, they play that Visionary. They probably want more mana. They have something expensive in their hand, or maybe they're missing a land. They want to make all their land drops. So use that, like update your understanding. So anyways, so in both, whether you're looking at yourself or your opponent, think about what you expect, and then whenever you're surprised, that's a moment to pause and sort of think deeper.
Okay. Awesome.
Overall, though, I want to say I think like you're playing very strong Magic here. The games I'm watching, I think like it's good that you're in these competitive settings and you're playing at a high level and you're playing with tier 1 decks. Like I think you're like on the right track for sure, 100%. This is coaching sessions more about like the sort of getting those 90% to 95% types of tweaks. But you're in a really good spot, and I've been impressed. So just take that away from this as well.
Awesome. Okay, well, speaking of more questions, if I could just grab you for another 5 minutes to go to the interview portion, that'd be great. So I'm just going to send the stream to be right back, and then I will just fix the layovers and stuff like that, and then we'll see you guys in the chat shortly for interviews.
Perfect.